I am 63 years old, and the morning I finally felt free, I was sitting on the tailgate of my truck watching the sun come up over a lake I had never seen before. I had a cup of coffee in my hand. It was still hot, and for the first time in maybe 4 years, I was not waiting for anyone to call me. That sounds like a small thing. It was not a small thing. My name is Howard. I spent 31 years working maintenance management for a commercial property company out of Knoxville, Tennessee. I am not a complicated man. I like fishing. I like college football. I kept the same truck for 11 years because it ran fine and I saw no reason to impress anybody. My wife Pauline used to say I was the most practical person she had ever met, and she did not always mean it as a compliment, but she said it with a smile, so I took it as one. Pauline passed away in October of 2022. Pancreatic cancer. From diagnosis to the end was 9 weeks. I did not have time to prepare for it. And then it was done. And I was standing in our kitchen on a Tuesday morning not knowing what to do with myself, or the 2 pounds of deli turkey someone had brought over. We had 3 children. Our oldest son, whom I will call my oldest, was 40 at the time and lived about 20 minutes away. Our daughter, whom I will call my daughter, was 37 and lived in the same town. Our youngest son was 34 and lived about an hour north. All 3 of them came home for the funeral. All 3 of them cried. All 3 of them told me they loved me and that I was not alone. I believed them. That was probably my first mistake. But I want to be fair. In the beginning, things were not calculated. My oldest lost his job about 6 weeks after the funeral, and he came to me genuinely struggling. He had 3 kids of his own, a mortgage, and his wife was only working part-time. I helped him out. 2,000 here, 1,500 there. It felt right. Pauline would have done the same thing without a second thought. I was grieving, and he was struggling, and it seemed like the natural thing a father does. What I did not see, what I was not looking for, was the pattern forming underneath it. By February of 2023, my daughter had started coming by more regularly, which I appreciated, honestly. The house felt big and quiet in a way it never had before. She would bring food sometimes. We would watch television. She asked a lot of questions about my finances, which I took as concern. She asked if I had a financial advisor. She asked about my pension and my retirement accounts. She asked whether I had updated my will since her mother passed. I told her I was working through it. She offered to help. She said it was a lot to manage alone at my age, and because I was 62 and tired and still not sleeping well, I let her help. I added her to my primary checking account so she could assist with bills when I needed it. I gave her the login for my online banking. I trusted her completely. She was my daughter. It did not occur to me that this was the setup. My youngest started calling more often too. He had some kind of business idea, something to do with a food truck, and he needed startup capital. I lent him $8,000. He said he would pay it back within the year. He did not pay it back within the year. By midsummer of 2023, I had given out close to $60,000 across the 3 of them in various forms. Some of it was gifts. Some of it was loans that I was starting to understand were not really loans. I was not alarmed yet. I told myself families go through seasons. I told myself Pauline would have wanted me to be generous. Then in September of 2023, I got a call from my bank. A fraud alert on my account. A large transfer had been flagged. It turned out not to be fraud, technically, because my daughter had the access credentials. But the transfer, $11,000, moved to an account I did not recognize, had not been discussed with me. When I asked her about it, she said it was for a home repair she had been managing on my behalf. A gutter repair and some foundation work on my house that she had arranged. I walked around my house that afternoon. The gutters looked the same as they always had. There was no evidence of any foundation work. I did not confront her immediately. I'm not a man who moves fast on things like that. I needed to think. I needed to look at the full picture before I said anything. Because once you say something like that to your child, it cannot be unsaid. I pulled my bank statements for the previous 8 months. I sat at my kitchen table on a Saturday morning with a legal pad and a highlighter, and I went through every line. It took me 4 hours. When I was done, I had identified approximately $94,000 in withdrawals and transfers that I could not account for through my own spending. Some of it was in smaller amounts, 50 here, 200 there, which I had simply not noticed in the blur of grief. Some of it was in larger transfers like the one that had triggered the fraud alert. $94,000. I sat there for a long time after that. I want to tell you I was angry. But angry is not quite the right word. It was more like the world had gone slightly out of focus, like the furniture in the room was still the same furniture, but it was all 6 inches to the left of where it was supposed to be. I had known these 3 people their entire lives. I had coached Little League. I had driven through the night when my daughter's car broke down in college. I had co-signed a lease for my youngest when he was 22. And somewhere in the middle of my grief, they had looked at my bank account and seen an opportunity. I did not say anything to any of them. Not yet. The next week I called a family law attorney in Knoxville, a woman I had heard of through a former colleague. I told her what I had found. She referred me to a forensic accountant she worked with regularly, a man who specialized in exactly this kind of family financial dispute. I hired both of them. This cost me money, but it felt necessary the way replacing a bad brake line is necessary. The accountant spent 3 weeks going through everything. His conclusion was that the withdrawals were not random. They were deliberate and patterned in a way that suggested someone with regular account access and familiarity with my spending habits had been carefully staying below thresholds that would trigger automatic alerts. My daughter had that access. She also had the kind of familiarity with my habits that comes from being my child for 37 years. His documented figure was $106,000. Around this same time, I became aware of something else. My daughter had told my oldest that I was, in her words, not as sharp as I used to be. She had mentioned to him that I sometimes forgot things, mixed up dates, seemed confused. He had apparently agreed with her, at least in the conversation she described to me later, and a neighbour of mine, a woman named Bev who has lived across the street for 15 years and does not have a dishonest bone in her body, told me that my daughter had come by and asked her some questions. Questions about how often I left the house, whether I seemed to be managing okay on my own, whether I had seemed confused or forgetful lately. I understood what that was. I had read enough about elder law in the previous weeks to recognize the groundwork for a guardianship proceeding. If she could establish, through neighbors, through her brothers, through a doctor, if she could manage it, that I was mentally declining, she could petition the court to have herself named my legal guardian. At which point my finances, my property, everything would be in her control entirely, legally. I am a man who kept detailed maintenance logs for 11 years of commercial properties. I schedule my own doctor appointments. I balanced my own checkbook every month from the time I was 22 years old. I forget things the way every 63-year-old forgets things, which is to say occasionally and without consequence. But none of that would matter if a court decided otherwise based on testimony from people I had trusted. I spent 2 weeks after that being very deliberate. I saw my primary care physician for a full evaluation and asked him to document my cognitive status formally. He did. The documentation was clear. I was in good health and showed no signs of cognitive decline. I kept that report. I had my attorney draft a new will and a durable power of attorney naming a longtime friend in Chattanooga, a man I had known since college and who had no financial entanglement with my family, as my agent in the event I became incapacitated. I specifically excluded all 3 of my children. I removed my daughter's access from my checking account and all online banking. I opened 2 new accounts at a different bank entirely. I did not tell her. I also called a real estate agent. The house Pauline and I had lived in for 26 years was worth a good deal more than we had paid for it. Knoxville real estate had moved significantly in the last decade. I had the house assessed. The number the assessor came back with was more than I had expected. I listed it 2 weeks later. I want to be clear about something. That house was mine. My name was on the deed from the day we bought it. My wife's name had been on it too, and when she passed, full ownership transferred to me. The house was not a family asset in any legal sense. My children had no ownership interest in it. They had lived in it as children. They had come home to it at Christmas. My daughter had been married in the backyard. But it was my house, and I had every legal and moral right to sell it. I accepted an offer in the 3rd week of February. Before the closing, I invited all 3 of my children to dinner. My daughter, my oldest, and my youngest. I told each of them separately that I wanted to have a family meal, that I had been thinking about things and I wanted us all to sit down together. They each agreed. My daughter offered to bring a salad. I made dinner, pot roast, which was something Pauline used to make, because I wanted the evening to feel significant, and I wanted them to feel the weight of what we were sitting inside. They arrived within about 15 minutes of each other. My daughter brought the salad as promised. My youngest brought a bottle of wine. Nobody opened. My oldest shook my hand when he came in, which he does when he is nervous. We ate. I let dinner go normally. I asked about the grandchildren. My daughter talked about a trip she was planning. My youngest mentioned the food truck, which had not actually launched yet, 18 months after I had lent him the startup money. After dinner, I asked them all to stay at the table. I went to the sideboard and picked up 3 manila envelopes I had left there, and placed one in front of each of them. My daughter asked what it was. I told them to open them. Inside each envelope was a summary, prepared by my attorney and the forensic accountant. The summary laid out the unauthorized transactions, the amounts, the dates, and the documented total. There was also a letter from my attorney explaining that I was aware of the conversations regarding my cognitive status and had obtained a formal physician's evaluation which was included, and there was a final page which was a notice that I had removed my daughter's access to all financial accounts, and that going forward any further attempt to access my accounts or assets without my explicit written consent would be treated as a legal matter. Nobody said anything for a while. My daughter started to say that the transfers were for things she was managing for me. She listed the gutter repair again. She mentioned a service call for the HVAC that I also had no record of. I told her I had walked around the house and the gutters had not been touched. I told her the HVAC company I had used for 11 years had no record of a service call in the relevant period. My oldest said he had not known about any of this. I told him that was his business and not mine to adjudicate. My youngest did not say very much. He is the quietest of the 3 and always has been. My daughter's voice went up in pitch the way it does when she is upset. She said I was being unreasonable. She said she had given up time to help me and that this was how I was treating her. She said she was worried about me and that this was coming from a place of love. I told her I understood that was her position. She asked if I was going to report her to the police. I told her that was a matter I had discussed with my attorney and would continue to discuss with my attorney, and that it was not something I was prepared to answer at the dinner table. My oldest asked about the house. He had noticed the real estate listing apparently. He asked whether I was really planning to sell. I told him the house was under contract. He asked where I was going to live. I told him I had made arrangements. I asked them to leave after that. I was polite about it. I told them I loved them. Because I do, in the complicated way you love people who have hurt you badly without seeming to understand what they did. My daughter hugged me on the way out, which surprised me. My youngest said he was sorry, though I was not sure what exactly he meant by it. My oldest stood on the porch for a moment, before he got in his car, like he wanted to say something else. And then he didn't. I closed the door and stood in the kitchen and was very quiet for a while. The closing on the house was in March. After commission and fees, the check I walked away with was substantial. I had no mortgage remaining. Every dollar of it was mine. I had already rented a small place on the water in a town about 2 hours east of Knoxville. I did not tell my children the address. I forwarded my mail through a post office box. I took my time moving. I was not in a hurry anymore. My attorney followed up on the financial matter. My daughter ultimately repaid $62,000 through a settlement agreement that avoided a formal legal proceeding. The remaining amount was acknowledged in the agreement as well, structured differently for reasons I will not get into here. I signed off on the agreement because a trial would have taken 2 years, and I was 63 and did not want to spend 2 years in a courtroom. I wanted to go fishing. I wrote each of my children a letter before I left Knoxville. Not a long letter. I told them I loved them. I told them I was not interested in cutting them off permanently, but that I needed time and distance and a new set of circumstances before I could think about what a relationship with any of them looked like going forward. I told my youngest that the $8,000 for the food truck I considered forgiven, and that I hoped the business eventually happened for him, and that I hoped he understood why I was not going to be the one to fund round 2. I told my daughter that I did not hate her, but that I was still trying to understand how the person who helped me pick out a casket for her mother was also the person who had been taking money from my account while I was grieving. I told my oldest that I did not hold him responsible for what his sister had done, but that his silence when she spoke about my supposed cognitive decline was something I needed him to sit with. Then I loaded my truck and drove east. The first morning at the lake, I woke up before 6. I made coffee. I put on a jacket because it was still cold in the mornings in March and went outside and sat on the tailgate and watched the light come up over the water. There was no sound except the birds and the occasional truck on the highway half a mile away. My phone was in my pocket. It did not ring. I thought about Pauline. I think about her every day. I thought about the house and the 26 years of living we had done inside it, the walls we had painted and repainted, the carpet we had argued about replacing, the kitchen window that always fobbed up in winter, and the way she used to draw little pictures in the condensation when she was waiting for her coffee to brew. I thought about what she would make of all of this. I think she would have been sad about it. She loved those kids fiercely, but I also think she would have told me I did the right thing, because Pauline was an honest woman, and honesty was the thing she valued most, and what my children had done was not honest. I have been at the lake for a while now. I joined a small fishing club about a month after I arrived. 3 mornings a week, sometimes 4. I am up before sunrise with a thermos and my gear, and I am on the water by 6:30. The men in the club are good company. They do not ask too many questions. They talk about fish and weather and local politics, and that is about the right level of conversation for a Tuesday morning. My oldest has called twice. I answered once. We talked for about 20 minutes. It was careful and polite, and neither of us said the hardest things. But I think it was a start. My daughter has sent 3 text messages. I have read all of them and replied to 2. My youngest sent a card, which surprised me. It just said he was thinking about me and that he was sorry and that he hoped I was okay. There was no asking it anywhere. I read it twice and then put it on my windowsill where I can see it from my chair. I am not a man who expected his retirement to look like this. I thought I would be in that house in Knoxville, watching the grandchildren grow up down the road, maybe doing a project on the garage in the summers. I thought Pauline would be there. I thought a lot of things, but I am 63 years old and I am on the water before sunrise 3 mornings a week, and my coffee is hot and nobody is taking anything from me that I did not choose to give. And on the mornings when the fog sits low on the lake and the light comes up slow and orange through the trees, something in me that had been clenched for a long time feels like it is finally, carefully, beginning to open. I built this. Not the way I planned to. But I built it. And that, I have decided, is enough. I have had a lot of time to think out here by the water. That is what happens when the noise finally stops. You think. And what I keep coming back to is this. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides to become someone who takes from a grieving parent. It does not happen that way. It happens slowly, the way a small leak ruins a floor, one small justification at a time, one boundary quietly moved, one excuse that goes unchallenged. My daughter did not start with $106,000. She started with access, and I gave it to her because I was 62 years old and my wife had just died, and I did not have the energy to be suspicious of my own child. That is not weakness. I want to say that clearly. Trusting the people you raised is not a character flaw, but there is a difference between trust and willful blindness, and somewhere in my grief I had crossed that line without noticing. I had stopped paying attention because paying attention was hard and grief makes everything hard. That is the truth of it, and I think a lot of people who have been in similar situations know exactly what I mean. What I learned, the hard way, the only way some lessons come, is that love and accountability are not opposites. I loved my daughter. I still do. But love without accountability is just a blank check, and I had been handing those out for the better part of 2 years. The moment I sat down with those bank statements and a highlighter and made myself really look, at what had been happening, everything changed, not because the numbers were shocking though they were, but because looking clearly at an uncomfortable truth is the first act of self-respect, and I had not been respecting myself enough to look. The other thing I think about is the guardianship plan. That one still stops me sometimes when I am out on the water in the early morning. The idea that my own daughter had begun building a case, quietly, patiently, that her father was losing his mind. To neighbors, to her brothers, to anyone who would listen, while simultaneously moving money out of my account. That took planning. That took a kind of cold intelligence that I genuinely did not know she had. And in some strange way I think that was the thing that finally cut through my grief and made me move. Not the money, the plan. Because a plan like that does not get built by someone who is confused about what they are doing. It gets built by someone who has made a choice. People make choices, and choices have weight. They accumulate. The things my children chose to do in those 2 years carried consequences that I did not create and could not prevent. What I could control was what came next. I could sit in that Knoxville house and wait for things to get worse, or I could pick up a highlighter, call an attorney, and start deciding my own life again. I chose to decide. I do not think of what I did as revenge. I think of it as clarity. I stopped pretending. I stopped absorbing costs, financial and otherwise, that were not mine to absorb. I sold the house because it was my house and I was ready. I moved to the water because I wanted to. I wrote honest letters because silence was no longer something I was willing to offer in place of truth. Howard is doing okay. That is what I would tell anyone who asked. The fog on the lake in the early morning is something else. The fishing is decent. The men in the club do not need much from me, and I do not need much from them, and that is a kind of friendship I have come to appreciate more than I ever expected. I built a different life than the one I planned, but I built it with my eyes open, and that I have come to understand as the only kind worth having.